What's the scariest sound in the world? Is it a sudden noise in the middle of the night? Or is it the silence after you ask, how much money do we have left? For Jieming and Xiaoling, that silence was deafening. After another long day of caregiving, they finally sat down at their small dining table, bills and bank statements spread out like a losing hand of cards. The numbers weren't just ink on paper. They were a countdown timer. 3 months, that's all they had. 90 days until their savings would completely run out. 90 days until the financial safety net they had woven so carefully would tear, sending them into a free fall. The weight of their reality pressed down on them. They were supporting not just themselves, but both sets of aging parents. Their dream condo, once a symbol of their success and a sanctuary, now felt like a golden cage. The medical bills for their parents' treatments were a relentless tide, pulling them further and further from shore. The conversation that followed was one they never imagined having. It was a conversation whispered in the dark, heavy whis. Unshed tears. What do we do? Xiaoling asked, her voice barely audible. Jieming stared at the wall, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Two horrifying options emerged from the shadows. The first was unthinkable: sell the condo, sell their home, the place filled with their memories, the foundation they had built their life upon. Where would they go? How could they uproot not just themselves, but also their parents who needed stability more than ever? The thought felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked for. But the second option was even worse, a true Sophie's choice. Or, Jieming said, the word catching in his throat. We have to cut back on expenses. Xiaoling knew what he was implying. It was the unspoken fear that had haunted their nights. No, she said, her voice firm, cutting through the heavy air. We can't stop the treatments. Not for your father. Not for my mother. We can't. It was a line in the sand. They looked at each other, the silent pact forming between them. They would not sacrifice one family for the other. They would not give up their home. They were in this together, and they would find another way. Defiance sparked. In their eyes, they refused to be victims of their circumstances. If the existing paths led to ruin, they would have to forge a new one. No matter how difficult, the decision was made. They would fight, they would work harder than ever before. For Jieming, this meant stepping back into the grueling world of night shifts. After a full day at his office job, he wouldn't go home to rest. Instead, he'd head to a warehouse, a logistics center, anywhere that would hire him for the night. He'd stack boxes, load trucks, his body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, stolen and brief, unsatisfying nap between jobs. He was running on pure adrenaline in the desperate hope that each extra dollar earned was a brick reinforcing their crumbling financial wall. His once bright eyes became shadowed with exhaustion, but he pushed on, driven by the images of his parents, of Xiaoling, of the life they were fighting to protect. Xiaoling's battle was different but no less demanding. With a heavy heart, she made the difficult decision to leave her flexible part-time job. She needed a full-time salary, a steady, predictable income. She found a position back in her old field, a high-pressure corporate environment she had happily left behind. The long hours, the demanding deadlines, the office politics, it all came rushing back. But the biggest sacrifice was time. She could no longer be the primary caregiver, the one who was always there for every appointment, every meal, every moment of need. This led to another painful compromise. To make their new arrangement work, they had to hire help. But with their budget stretched to its absolute limit, they couldn't afford a professional, highly trained caregiver. They found someone cheap, a woman who seemed kind enough but lacked experience. She would be responsible for looking after all four parents in the condo while Jieming and Xiaoling were at their respective jobs. It was a risky move, a gamble born of desperation. They told themselves it was temporary, just until we get back on our feet, Xiaoling would say, trying to convince herself as much as Jieming. They tried to manage the risk. They wrote down detailed instructions, they created schedules, and called to check in as often as they could. For a few weeks, the precarious system seemed to hold. Jieming and Xiaoling were like two jugglers, keeping an impossible number of balls in the air. They were exhausted, stressed, and barely saw each other. Their home, once a place of peace, was now just a charging station where they briefly refueled before heading back into the storm. But they were surviving. They were making it work. The financial bleeding had slowed. A fragile sense of hope began to take root. And then, disaster struck. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Xiaoling was in a critical meeting, her phone silenced in her bag. Jieming was asleep, finally getting a few precious hours of rest before his night shift. At the condo, the caregiver was in the kitchen, distracted by a show on her phone, the volume turned up. In the bathroom, Jieming's father, whose mobility had been getting worse, tried to get up on his own. His hand slipped on the wet tile. There was a sickening thud, a cry for help that no one heard. He lay on the cold floor, his body twisted in an unnatural position, pain shooting through his leg. The caregiver, oblivious, continued to watch her show. Minutes stretched into an eternity. It wasn't until Xiaoling's mother went looking for him that he was found. The frantic phone call finally broke through. Jieming was jolted awake, his heart pounding with a familiar dread. Xiaoling saw the missed calls and felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. They rushed to the hospital, their minds reeling. The gamble had failed. Their desperate attempt to hold everything together had resulted in the very thing they feared most. As they stood in the sterile, white corridor of the emergency room, waiting for news from the doctor, the weight of their choices crashed down upon them. They had tried to save everything, but in doing so, had they put their family in even greater danger? The exhaustion, the stress, the financial pressure, it all paled in comparison to the guilt that now consumed them. They had reached for a solution out of desperation, and it had led them to this moment of crisis. What happens now? What new impossible choices will they face? The path forward has never been more uncertain. Thanks for watching. If you're finding the story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what happens next. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next episode.